Hello, and welcome to Afternoon Tea with Karen and Karen's Library. I have another celebrity special today with Jackie Turner from the Trans Justice Project. The Fueling Hate report was handed out to all the members of Parliament in Australia, and thanks from the project team, Jackie Turner, Project Lead, Trans Justice Project. And the data that was collected for this report is the basis for many of the new hate crime laws. And it was collected from an online survey that took 3 minutes to complete, that was open from the 17th of the 15th of April 2023, promoted on social media by project team members, community controlled organisations, civil society groups, and community members. They received 3,099 responses. Half of those are trans people, and the other half are gender fluid non binary people. To protect their privacy, the survey was anonymous. And from the cover sheet, Jackie Turner, director of the Trans Justice Project, said trans people deserve to thrive, to feel safe in our communities, and have the freedom to be ourselves. But right now, our lives are under attack. We are urging the federal and state governments across the country to take decisive action to curb extremism and protect our community from hate by introducing federal and state anti-vilification laws that protect the entire LGBTQI plus whatever else they want community from abuse, harassment, vilification, and violence. Anyway, Jackie's going to touch on some other things here. The work together with social media companies and strengthen media regulations, and talk about some other things as well that are interesting. And Audrey from Geelong, she says some interesting things too.
I'm wondering, Jackie, maybe if we turn to you again, and I guess it's actually a common move by the far right in a lot of countries internationally, to attack trans people, and I think often the attacks on trans people are just the first step, and it's much broader layers of people that they've got in mind to attack eventually. But I'm wondering if you can talk about these first moves by US President Donald Trump to attack trans people in the US, and how that's impacted people here in Australia as well.
Yeah, so um, I think that for the trans community, we have been sounding the alarm for years at this point, about the fears that we have from the UK and what we've seen in the US, and warning that these tactics will soon be taken up by politicians in Australia. So I think for many people, they were expecting these things to be copied by conservative politicians here, actually long before they happened. But it doesn't stop it being scary. And I think a lot of folks were feeling, number one, really afraid of what such extreme directives from Trump could mean and what the knock-on impacts could be, as well as coming to terms with the fact that, yeah, these directives are changing the world that we live in. I know that I certainly wouldn't travel to the US right now, and it's strange to think that there are entire countries which are becoming no-go zones, which, I think as a queer person, you always know that there are certain countries that you probably shouldn't go to. But for new ones to be popping up like this is, kind of a surreal experience, actually. We know that these tactics are used because they are seen as a way that leaders can win and hang on to power. These are a tool of governments that want to scapegoat minorities, whoever they are, so that they can try and win political power, basically. So I think that a lot of the commentary that we're seeing out of the US right now is like, oh, trans people are only 1% of the population and everything. I think we all know that it's not really about that, right? It's about the shared social project that that Trump sees himself a part of, that many in MAGA see themselves a part of, which is, upholding a traditional family unit, really rigid gender norms, white supremacy, and capitalism. And these are the things that they really care about, and trans people are just one of the things that they use to focus that anger and outrage, so that they can mobilise their base. But I think the reaction in Australia has been that, people have been afraid of what this will be. But I think the weekend gave people a chance to channel that fear and anger. I think that we've had to, it's been hard to know what to do when the attacks haven't fully started, basically. So for the Queensland government to make such an extreme decision in some ways means that people can actually let out their anger and fear and, do something about it and really mobilise. So I think that people are enjoying the fact that they can actually do something, that they can join a local group and that they can sign a petition, send an email, make a phone call, like all of these things that you can do as part of activism.
Thank you very much for that. And Audrey, I wonder if you have any comments about this sort of moves by the far right I guess the conservative right, including Peter Dutton's transphobic push here in Australia as well.
Yeah, I see Peter Dutton's moves and things like that, and it's like, oh God, has Trump been whispering in his ear too much? And you can definitely see it through his thoughts and actions and things like that. But as Jackie touched on, like the nuclear family, the neo-Nazi dad, and the all that absolute crap, that it's just a horrible rhetoric that it doesn't belong in our diverse human culture. And them attacking minorities, and not just trans people, we are one of the people that it's focused on, but it's definitely really broad, and it's broad just across the minorities. And last year I got diagnosed with minority stress syndrome, and I was like, oh, that's a thing, shit. And so it makes sense that a lot of people are absolutely terrified to even leave the house at this point, because of all these fascist views, and we see what the Green Left is doing, and it's being actually human and accepting people for who they are, and our very diverse nature as humans is to just accept each other. And the things that the far right and the conservative right is pushing at the moment is just it's terrifying to a lot of people. And it definitely shows in our community.
Yeah, absolutely. Jackie, why do you think it is that the right continually pushing these culture wars?
It's a good question. I think that we know the reasons why they do it, right? Because it helps them, especially with the way that our online media and our sort of toxic information system works at the moment. It helps them attract attention, fuel outrage, and get their narrative out there. And we've seen this with Trump, we've seen this with Dutton's campaign as well, that really, if you just keep courting controversy, you can kind of take up the airwaves. Playing small target doesn't work against that, because essentially then you're just seeding the ground. So look, I really see it as a fundamentally anti-democratic way of operating, but that doesn't mean that that's gonna change, because I think that the era that we're in right now is so linked to the systems we use to get information, right? Like when we think about what's happened with Meta and X over the past few years, the majority of us are getting our information through these sources. We also have massive concentration of media ownership. There's real questions about how we move forward, and how we actually protect the institutions that support democracy and democratic participation in this time, because, like, of course, information is essential to a democracy and where you get information from. So, but we have a situation where basically all the forms of information where we get information now are privatized. Yeah, look, I don't have any solutions on that. It's a bit of a rabbit hole to go down, but yeah, I think that the way forward for social movements, right, is that I think is to be making sure that we're actually, going back to basics of doing really good organizing, making sure that we're actually engaging with people in their communities, talking about the material conditions that people are dealing with, whether that's housing or unemployment and poverty, and making sure that we are actually leaving space for folks to build broad coalitions so that we're bringing people with us. Because at the moment, the MAGA movement and the right are getting really good at recruiting the people who don't feel like they have a place in progressive or like justice-centered politics.
You mentioned that small target strategies don't work against this kind of culture war. So that brings up the obvious question: like, what do you make of the record of the Labor government under this last term of Anthony Albanese?
That's a great question. I could talk at length about it. I think what I'll say is that our role as a social movement and as people who want to intervene is to understand the terrain as it is and work within that, right? Like, okay, so this is what we're dealing with. We have a Labor government that's basically really hesitant about doing anything that would support the queer community too openly. So what do we have to do to make political space for that to become common sense? What do we have to do to make political space so that the people attacking us on these things are being pushed back and marginalized? Our role as a social movement is to build public support, right, and public understanding and move people to action. So how are we doing that? I think that's what I would say.
Yeah, no, thanks for that.
What about his contention there are only two genders? Are you with that?
Well, I've been clear in relation to there being two sexes and a group of people obviously outside of male and female, a small group, but nonetheless important to recognise, who are intersex or indeterminate. And if you're talking about genders, well, people have a different association. There's a different recognition that people have, and that is an issue for them. I'm in the Howard mould of not being interested in what's happening in people's bedrooms or not knowing. I've got no interest in people's relationships. I want to be a Prime Minister for our country, and I want to make sure that we've got policies that work. I think the interesting piece, to your earlier question as well, about what has happened in America, I think there is a real live debate in our country about what happens in women's sport. I think girls and women should be protected, and I do think that a young girl who wants to compete in the 2032 Olympics but can't place at the moment because she's got biological males competing against her, I think that's a real problem. And I think there is a debate in our country in that regard.
So you're not changing the passport, for example?
We're not changing. I've been clear about that. It's our policies aren't going to change, and there are priorities, cost of living and other issues which I think are foremost in people's minds.
And that'll do. See you later. Bye.